that side.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Shannon Schaaf. I'm the Executive Director of the CFA Society of Minnesota. And I've been here a little over a year now, so I know many faces in this room. We're really excited to have you today and our wonderful panel. I think it's just going to be great. Even our planning conversations have been fantastic. Do you want to do the slides for me? I do want to quick say a thank you to our annual sponsors. I know some of you are represented here today. Annual sponsorship is what helps us bring programming like this to the membership. So we always want to make sure you get recognition and know that we really appreciate your support. And if you're interested in being an annual sponsor, if you don't see your name on here, reach out to me because I'm happy to set you up with that. Okay. And before I turn it over to Rob, I just wanted to let you know we're going to use Slido today. If you haven't used this before, it's just an online polling program. So you can just on your phone or your laptop, go to slido.com. You do have some instructions here. When you get there, you put in this code and then it'll bring up the poll that we're using. And then there's a Q&A tab too that you can use. And Rob will, when we get to the question part, he will cue you that the questions are on here and then you answer them on Slido. And then it'll be a live update on the screen. So I'd like to introduce Rob Britton. Rob is the current board president of the CFA Society of Minnesota. He's going to moderate our discussion today. And so I'll turn it over to Rob to introduce our panelists.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you all for coming today. We're very excited about this initiative, serving our existing members. I'd like to introduce this very prestigious panel. I'm honored to actually be sharing the stage with such an accomplished group of people. First, we have Katie Brever. She's the Client Relationship Manager for Disciplined Growth Investors and the Volunteer of the Year for 2023. Sitting next to her is Peter Kolar. Peter is the Vice President and Wealth Management Consultant at RBC Wealth Management. Please join me in welcoming Peter. Last but not least, last but not Leif, I said. Last but not least, we have Leif Gunderson. He is the founder of Nord Associates, and I just a little birdie whispered to me that Nord Associates now has an ADV that's out there. So formally registered. So please welcome me. Or join me in welcoming Leif to the panel as well. Okay, so now we're going to get to just some very basic polling. Ladies and gentlemen, we aspire to be useful to you all. That is why this organization exists, is to serve our members. And we're hoping that by knowing a little bit more about you, where you are in your career, and what brings you here, that'll help us steer this conversation to serve the greatest utility to you here today. So if you could all kindly let us know where you are, and you can see it does it in real time. I feel like this is like at a carnival where you have the water gun and you shoot it, and the different horses go at different speeds. Okay, so we've had 11 people respond. Is anyone still trying to respond but is having technical difficulties? Okay, so did we have a previous? This is the first slide.
This is one of two.
Where are you in your career? So we have setting up, okay. Looking for a second act. Found my calling. Okay. All right, so why don't we go to the next question? What brings you here? It looks like we had, all right, more participation here. Interesting. I want to listen to the speaker's stories. I want to network and have a good time. Sadly, that's going to be a little after 4 o'clock when we go to the bar. What's out there? Okay, very helpful. Thank you all for your feedback. I will certainly steer the conversation in a way that meets the audience's requests. Why don't we go spend the first 5 minutes of our event and maybe just people introduce themselves, their professional backgrounds. Maybe everyone takes 5 minutes each, or leave me a little bit less if you're more comfortable with that. Katie, why don't you go first?
Sure. As mentioned, I am currently a client relationship manager at Disciplined Growth Investors. We are a long-only growth mid-cap and small-cap buy-side shop. We've been around for, I think this is what. But I joined the firm about 6 years ago, my career has, well, not been very linear, but it's been, I guess, an interesting way to get to the role I'm in today. When I was in college, I interned with Wells Fargo in Duluth. I went to University of Minnesota Duluth for undergrad. Had an internship, and they told me they really wanted me to stay with Wells Fargo, but there wasn't any roles here in Minneapolis. And I said, great, because I don't want to stay in Minnesota. So they sent me to Las Vegas, of all places. And so I stayed with Wells, went up to Las Vegas. Very interesting place to live. I was 22 at the time, had never been to Vegas before. But it was really good. The role was really good. They were building up a trust department where they wanted to basically all small trust accounts, send them to a call center type of situation where they'd have an investment manager, and they hired younger investment management people to manage them. So I got there and I got a book of 700 clients, all under $1 million to manage. So we did it mostly in models, but had calls regularly. It was a great experience, but I decided that Vegas wasn't really the place for me to really set up my life. So about a year and a half after being there, I decided I wanted to move out to Chicago. So I had found a recruiter and had worked with them. They found me a position with Harris Associates in Chicago. They are an international and domestic equity shop. They run the Oakmark mutual funds. So I joined them, and while I was there, I decided to get my MBA. So I got my MBA while I was at Loyola, and while I was there, they asked me to kind of head up starting their 24-hour trading. I was doing most of their trading for all their international equities at the time, and so they really asked if I would help bring them to 24 hours, which was a great opportunity. I learned a ton. We got a lot of Japanese clients. It was wonderful. The downside was I was on call for 21 hours a day because the markets internationally aren't open between 3 and 6 p.m. So it was really great. I was there for almost 7 years, and I probably would have stayed with the firm. It was a great firm to work for forever, but I decided I didn't want to stay in Chicago for a lot of personal reasons. I wanted to come back to Minnesota. So and I also wanted a little more balance in my life versus just working so much. So I moved back to Minnesota, and I had actually, in the deciding what I wanted to do and what I wanted to do next back here, I'd been working with a recruiter, and they said, I think you would be great at recruiting for the investment management industry. And I had never known what a recruiter had done or whatnot, and was not on my radar to do. But I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. So I moved back to Minnesota and I started recruiting. I ended up recruiting for about 7 years, specifically for the investment management industry, but across the country. It was great. I worked with a lot of huge companies. It was a totally different look. You got to see how all these firms worked from more of a macro view versus being inside and trading for one particular firm. So it was a great experience. And I always said if I was going to go back into the industry, it was going to be again for a small firm and something that I really believed in. And out of the blue, I had been working, I'd been volunteering with the CFA Society actually for years, and I had known Robert Buss at the time. And they had an opening at Disciplined Growth Investors. And probably wasn't exactly the role that I wanted at the time, but I was like, let's give it a shot because I think it's a great way to get back into the investment management industry itself. And so I did that about 6 years ago. Earlier this year, I became a partner and have taken on a couple of years ago, took on my own book of clients as a client relationship manager. So it's been a great ride, but like I said, not very linear along the way. But that's a little bit about my background. I don't know, That might have been longer than 5 minutes, I'm not sure.
You're about 6, so I think that's just fine. We round down. Peter, do you want to go next? That's great, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter Kolar, I'm with RBC Wealth Management, and a little bit of a different trajectory. I've been with RBC for about 95% of my career. So thinking back to how I ended up where I'm at, I was in college at Creighton University, and I had a professor who at the time, it was the best class I took in college. It was investment analysis, and the professor at the time was actually an RBC financial advisor. At the end of one of the classes, he said, "My branch director is looking for an intern. If anybody's interested, let me know." And I was a junior, and I was a sophomore or junior in college. I ran up there and ended up calling the branch director, and so I interned at RBC for 2 or 3 years in college. I used the word intern lightly. I think I mostly wandered around the office, talking to financial advisors and filed papers. But it was great exposure. I learned to love the business. Came back to Minneapolis after college, worked for RBC in operations, kind of bounced around a little bit at the firm. I remember thinking back, when I was in operations and I knew I wanted to get out of there, and I started kind of researching, started kind of looking up due diligence reports, manager due diligence reports on our internal site. And I found the authors, the analysts of those reports, and I started meeting with them. And eventually they had an opening on their team. And I didn't get that job. A friend of mine got that job, but I got kind of a sister job to that in the product management group. And from there, I spent time working with financial advisors, product management type stuff, mostly in managed money, so separate accounts, ETFs, mutual funds, and kind of the programs in which financial advisors, invest their clients. Ended up spending also some time in one of our branch offices doing research for a financial advisor who ran discretionary models. All throughout this process, I kind of knew my dream was always to be an analyst. I always thought I would be an analyst. That's something cool, which was kind of the genesis for going through the CFA program, which I've come to find out later, if you're not really determined the CFA, if being an analyst is not really what you want to do, I'd steer you somewhere else, because it certainly took me a while to get through the program. From there, I worked, I went back to our strategies team and worked primarily working with advisors and clients on asset allocation, investment strategy, sitting in client meetings, positioning investment strategy and asset allocation for clients. From there, I actually pivoted to that 5% that I spent at another firm, and I went to an institutional investment consulting firm to work directly with clients, primarily with large healthcare clients and retirement clients. Did that for almost exactly a year. And during that time, I met some of the best people, some of the smartest people I've met. And I still stay in touch with today. This guy's actually one of them. Don't get too big of that. But he's got a great story and a really cool career path as well. And I've been lucky to know. After that year, I went back to RBC to help build out our private health platform. So RBC Wealth Management, owned by the Royal Bank of Canada in obviously up in Toronto. Very conservative. Canadians in general tend to be more conservative. We didn't have a very robust alts platform. So there was an opportunity to come back to the firm and kind of start to build that out. In my time there, we actually brought on some far smarter people to further help build out that platform and build the chassis of it, if you will. I then moved on to the role I'm in today, where it's really a unique role. So it's essentially the business of financial advising. So when you think about financial advisors are in branch offices, those branch offices are part of complexes. We have people who run those complexes. So each of those complexes is probably anywhere between $150 and $250 million business in and of itself. We have 20 of those around the country. My role is to effectively serve as the right hand of 2 of those complex directors. So we're right there, looking at the P&L of that business itself. We're working with financial advisors to help them become more productive, more efficient. We have teams, we quarterback what's called the client strategies team, which are all of those kind of field-facing experts, trust experts, estate experts, lending experts. I tend to play the investment expertise role on that just by my background of being an analyst, but certainly far smarter people that I bring into that client relationship. And then, we're kind of, in a way, the drivers of strategy. So when our head of strategy and president and CEO come up with the direction that we want to take the firm, they kind of look at our team to help drive that throughout the field. So I do that role. I actually manage a portion of the country for the team. So I have colleagues in the Chicago, Milwaukee area, the Pittsburgh area, and I just hired somebody down in the Kansas City area. And then I cover the kind of local market. Really fun job, but really, I think different than where I thought my career would end up when I thought I wanted to be an analyst. But I certainly found my passion. The business of kind of wealth management is an exciting business.
Thank you.
All right.
Was that more than 5?
No, I'm checking where I'm at, so I'm gonna try to keep this at 5 if I can. Yeah, Leif Gunderson, thanks for having me here. I guess we can go back to me. I've recently founded my own business, but I started, my career actually in La Crosse, Wisconsin, of all places, while I was going to undergraduate school there, and have had a lot of kind of, luck through networking and luck through seeing things in the newspaper that led me to where I am today in the career. So I was going to UWL in my sophomore year. I think I was back here at Wells Fargo on the bond trading floor doing an internship, similar to Peter, kind of playing those little Google Doodle games most of the day because I had no idea what I was doing. But going back to school at that year, you've kind of run out of that savings money and you're probably gonna have to keep working. So I'm scouring the La Crosse Tribune for a job when I get back and came across an advertisement for a commodity futures broker, right? And kind of knowing I wasn't probably going to be able to be a broker either, but I'm just going to go talk to them and see what happens. So I went down and interviewed with this tiny commodity futures brokerage and ended up just kind of sitting there all day talking with them and kept saying, I can't be a broker because I'm going to class most of the day. And by the end of the day, this guy said, why don't you just come in, we'll pay you like $10 an hour and you can just, help us figure stuff out around here. Sounds like fun. So that led to my job as I ended up becoming, I think, the chief compliance officer of a commodity futures brokerage when I was a junior in college. My first task there was he gave me a couple banker's boxes and said, I haven't done taxes in like 3 years. Can you work with a CPA, like figure this out? And so cleaned up his taxes for 3 years. The firm was called My E-Trading at the time. So if you remember, this is when the stock trading sites had just kind of come along. Commodity futures was a little bit behind, so piggybacked on the old E-Trade name. They weren't big fans of that. So when the cease and desist letter came, I was also tasked with renaming the firm. But it was, oddly a successful firm. It did pretty well, but, and I learned a ton there. For one, that you can start your own business, even if you feel like you don't know what you're doing, because this guy did it. And maybe that led me to entrepreneurship, but I knew I wasn't going to stay down there in La Crosse. But one other thing that did happen there that puts me in this room, I didn't really know what the CFA was, but how many of you use Kaplan Schweizer materials when you were studying for the exam? Guess where that company was based? La Crosse, Wisconsin. And oddly enough, they had a class called Advanced Financial Analysis, which gave you 3 credits. And all it was a prep course for CFA level 1. So you get course credit. It forces you to keep studying.
Yeah.
And I was able to, pass that level 1 exam. And I think the rule was you had to graduate in the same year. Like you didn't have to graduate, but as long as you graduate in the same year. So I actually took level 1 when I was still in school in June and graduated in December. So a huge head start on the exam. And I honestly don't know if I would have done it had that not happened. So again, very lucky to have been where I was at that time, and landed at Jeffrey Slocum Associates, Brever, Peter and Casey as well. Right out of undergrad, I saw an opportunity to go join there and was able to get through that CFA program quickly so that when Slocum was looking to build a research team for the first time, I was able to raise my hand and have kind of legitimacy of that CFA to say, look, I'd love to be on this new research team. And I joined that first on the real asset side, but then eventually covering all things private markets. So private capital, anything in an illiquid structure. Spent a lot of time on building commitment modeling capabilities and working with anything from a $25 million foundation to a multi-billion-dollar healthcare system on how are you going to pace your commitments to private equity funds or private capital funds, I should say, across your portfolio. Thinking about portfolio construction in addition to kind of manager diligence and filling the slots on those forward calendars, if you will. So I was there for almost 12 years. And then in 2016, the company was about to be acquired by a group called Pavilion. And it was time to naturally look around and see what else might be out there. And I thought about doing something entrepreneurial then, but really around the commitment modeling and making that a software because Burgess and a few others were the only ones that were doing it at that point. But I had a 0-year-old and a 2-year-old and a new house and a little bit different spot to step out and try to do something entrepreneurial. And at that time, the guy next to me reached out. And my boss at Slocum at the time, Brian Mullen, was going to go to RBC. And as Peter said, some much smarter people came over to help build out the alts platform. So I'm one of those much smarter people that came over with Brian Mullen to try to make a proactive alts platform where there hadn't been one historically. So that in its own right felt a little entrepreneurial. And I said, great, that'll be fun to do. And I think we were pretty successful in that regard, digitizing a platform that had been very paper-based, broadening the appeal, bringing on a lot of high quality managers, and grew it pretty substantially. And what brought me to wanting to start my own firm is that In both cases, at the end of Slocum and at the end of RBC, we ran into what I would call the problem of scale. And that is when you're at an organization and you've successfully continued to grow AUM, it gets harder and harder to justify looking at smaller capacity constrained, emerging, newer fund managers because it costs the same amount, if not more, to diligence them because they don't have the resources to help you out along the diligence process. And you might only be able to put 10 million of your client money in it, where if you go give Blackstone a call and you put BREIT on the platform, they send out their army of distributors, the diligence gets done quickly and you raise 250 million before you know it, right? So in most cases, from an AUM business model standpoint, it makes all the sense in the world to work with big firms, big distribution arms. Even though I've found, and I think it's just more interesting to find smaller up and coming managers, I think there's a case to be made for the risk return profile of those managers as well. So what I'm trying to solve by founding Nord Associates at the end of 2020, at the beginning of 2023 and 2022, how do I help groups that are interested in still accessing that end of the market in a new way? That's not through a fund to fund, maybe it's not through a broker dealer, and align them by making introductions through co-investment vehicles versus full-size fund commitments. So I'm in the process of building out that platform as we speak. And I think beyond that, helping with research or helping with some of that commitment modeling and things for organizations that maybe just need a little bit of help on alts, but don't want to have a full kind of consulting relationship, trying to fill that niche as well. So today I spend most of my days having calls with really interesting new and emerging managers, as well as groups that hopefully could use my support. They maybe have 2 or 3 high net worth clients that would like to have a commitment model or a few of these funds, but not enough to justify hiring a full-time analyst at the firm, for instance. That's the niche I'm trying to fill with Nord Associates.
I would quickly say beyond just, we at RBC have actually continued to leverage Leif where we can, kind of a consulting base. Because when you talked about his commitment model, that's there's not a lot of those out there, and we have clients who have continued to rely on that, and so we've continued to maintain a relationship with Leif post RBC, which I think is a testament to what he built, certainly, but then also just character and some of those smarts.
I find everyone's background and everyone's path, none of which are linear. I think Katie was great to point that out in the beginning. This is really fascinating. I've been taking notes. I'm going to go a little bit off the script just because of what you've been telling us. Katie, when you were talking, you were mentioning how you used recruiters in at least 2 different instances. I'd be curious here from the panel, how helpful was the use of recruiters in your career development, either as a resource or for just helping you find new jobs? Katie, why don't you go first, just because you mentioned you used one on at least 2 occasions.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, for when I was in Las Vegas and I was looking for a new position in Chicago, it was a lot, things were online. I'm not going to date myself too much, but it wasn't as easy to find jobs and interview as it is today. There was, we weren't doing video conferencing. Yeah, like it wasn't. So having a recruiter then was ideal. They would set a bunch of meetings up for me, and then I would fly there and I would interview for the day or whatever. So definitely when looking, I guess, outside of where I was living, it was essential. I don't know how I would have found a job in a different city at the time.
How did
Different this day.
How did you find a way to make the recruiters work for you? Because I remember when I was younger and I would use a recruiter, they would have a very well-defined set of criteria for all the candidates.
Yeah.
And they were really just, sifting through people to find a perfect match that they could get paid.
Yeah.
Yet in an instance like you're talking about, it sounds as if they were almost like your personal concierge career development consultant.
Yeah.
Talk about that, if you will.
And I don't know, I don't know, I don't think maybe there are as many recruiters like that anymore these days as there were back then.
Okay.
But yes, I'd reached out to them and they were looking for anybody that they felt that they could go and market to companies that they knew had openings or really good firms that they had partnerships with. And so for me, I got referred to them and it worked out great. I'm not sure I could find those types of recruiters again if I just wanted to. On the flip side, I was a recruiter for a long time as well. And so while I was recruiting, I tried to kind of have that same mentality. Like we had certain, jobs we were looking to fill and whatnot. But a lot of it too is out networking and finding really good candidates. So maybe didn't fill the job that you were looking for at the moment, but for knowing that you could help place them if you could find the right spot.
Could we go back to the previous slide from the poll? Given people have between 5 and 10 years experience, and some people are looking maybe for like a career transition, that seems to be the majority of the people that are here today. What kind of advice would you give them as they are considering finding a new job, either whether it's a lateral or a pivot, given the experience you had as a recruiter and working with recruiters?
I think the biggest thing is to network and to kind of make it known what you're interested in and just meet with a lot of people and kind of figure out what it is you want to do, but also, build those relationships. I think almost all of my job changes, other than probably the one that the recruiter in Chicago, came from the relationships that I already had when I was talking to the person. So it wasn't like I met them and was like, or you just applied online and went and found it. It was through openings that came up of somebody that I'd maybe known for 5 years, or they knew I was looking for a long time. So I think the biggest thing is to be networking and to kind of build relationships in the industry, across different firms or whatever that you might be interested in. Build those relationships, and you might not get the job today if you're looking for it, or if there's any openings or whatnot. But that's not to say in a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, or in 5, when you want to do something different, even though you didn't think you wanted to do anything different today, that those relationships matter. And then you don't have to work at building them from scratch when you're looking to ask somebody for something. So
That's really good input. And transitioning from, or I guess it's kind of part and parcel with Peter. So you've been able to pursue a bunch of varied interests within the same firm.
Right.
How did you manage that politically? Because I would imagine, just as an outsider, working for a big company, if you go to if your boss hears, hey, I have a rising star in Peter, yet I gather he is talking to someone about something totally different, perhaps you would feel that might compromise your career prospects.
Yeah.
Talk to me about or talk to everyone,
Yeah.
how do you navigate building that network and building different careers within the same organization?
Yeah, it's a good question, because a lot of roles are, related in the sense that, they're all related to the core business, but they are very differentiated. I think it starts with a company that wants to see its employees succeed. So I think I give a lot of credit to the company and never feeling like I wouldn't be able to network. I think at our company, and I do think at most companies, most well-run companies, they're interested in the growth, the excelling of their employees. I've always, even when I'm happy in my job, even when I love my job, and I've loved every job I've had, I'm continuing to network. Katie mentioned networking. To me, that's everything. I think back to when I was in my very first job in operations. I picked the phone and called our head of research or our head of fixed income. I don't think most people, 6 months into their job would probably just call the head of research at a massive firm, but I did, and I had the opportunity to sit down with them, credit to them, just purely on the basis of learning what they do and what their departments do. Not like, hey, I want a job, I want to get out of operations, purely educational, but then building those relationships. And I've done that, as I said, I've sought out mentors, and specifically mentors who aren't in the areas that I ultimately want to go. So one of my last mentors was actually our head of operations. I had been in operations from 2003 to 2005, right out of college. I didn't want to go back to operations. But the head of operations had a very visible role at the firm that was just super in tune with our executive committee and super in tune with how the business is run. And it was those conversations were less about the business, less about the inner workings of the business, and more about, almost coaching. Do this, have these conversations. You should talk to this person. And so I think again, a lot of credit to the company in that they foster those types of conversations and that type of personal development and mentorship. And I subsequently have, over the course of the last really last 15 years, I'll say, been a kind of an informal and in some cases formal mentor to a lot of people, really of all ages. People who want to make a job change, people who are new in their career, people who, have been in their career longer than me, but are interested in what I do and want to figure out how to get on this team. And so I think it doesn't have to come across as a negative for your, I actually kind of view it the other way. I think it's positive when your employee, and I would say this about, the employees that I have, I would love it if they're having conversations and networking and investigating other things, and ultimately good people you want to stay at the company in whatever form or fashion they're in, whatever form or fashion that's going to be. Because at the end of the day, it's one collaborative company moving towards one common goal, and the goal is to have the best people doing it.
That's interesting. As we're talking about networking, as we're talking about mentorship and sponsorship, as we're talking about networking sponsorship, it's not just about going to a happy hour, right? Or it's not about just finding someone senior and giving them a cold call and never calling them again. As your careers have progressed, your career has certainly been facilitated by the fact you did great work for people and they recognized it and they saw it. How do all of you view, what does networking mean to you? In other words, how do you do it effectively? Like if you put it on the inside of a matchbox or a matchbook, what are kind of the key things that people should be doing that they're not doing? Whether it's networking within your company to find a sponsor or a mentor, or doing it outside. And you're, as an entrepreneur, this is right up your alley.
Yeah.
You have to build a book.
Back of a matchbook, and you just can't make it transactional, right? It's not, to your point, you don't just go have a beer one day and, I've networked with that person and move on to
Where's
the
my
next
job?
one, or like, and show up with an ask. It doesn't hurt to ask, but, it's taking notes from that coffee and realizing, look, this isn't going to be a client for me, but they may have needs and I'm going to come across it. And when I do, I should hand that off anyway, even though there's no profit in it for me directly, right? So I'm coming across funds all the time. I have colleagues that work at the state, state pension, Minnesota State Board of Pensions and other big allocators that it would never make sense for them to work with you. They're not going to write a $3 million check to something. But when I hear they're looking for distressed debt mandates or something, I can say, hey, I did have a call with this group. It's not going to make sense for my platform. You should really get in contact with them and, make those connections that, while not directly valuable to you in the long term, start to accrue. And beyond that, to your point, working at, even within an organization, things like RBC, I think one lesson that at least I learned from my boss and mentor over the years is, your employees are going to have a path that they want to take. And if you can recognize that, look, we're going to do everything we can to do that within the organization. But if that's not in the organization, it's okay to try to help them there too. Because if you're thinking about this in the long run, even if someone leaves RBC, they could still be incredibly valuable to RBC in a different seat or another way, right? Or Slocum or wherever you've been. And so, not even though they may be incredibly valuable to you, it's okay to kind of set them free and help them along in their career path in a way that doesn't leave a bad taste in their mouth and, burn that relationship. So networking both internally with your existing employees. And then if you can, like we mentioned earlier, I'm the head of the Kaya chapter, putting yourself in positions to organize things like this, and not only attend, but also build events. It's amazing how many people you learn when you're the one that has to do the cold outreach to find panelists, to get people to show up to the events, to get sponsors. Getting involved in organizations like this beyond, going to the events can really boost your network in a hurry.
I think it's interesting, and I can know at least anecdotally, we've had a lot of people that have worked on committees at the at CFA Minnesota that have parlayed the experience and the networks that they built and the connections that they made as committee members into jobs. So I think to your point about being involved in an organization and being a volunteer gives people a chance to see this person's pleasant to be around. This person is capable, they're reliable. I think it goes a lot further than just buying someone a beer. 45 minutes.
I was gonna, when you started with Leif, I was gonna say, the transactional piece of that, you have to have a genuine interest. They're gonna be able to tell whoever you're meeting with, they're gonna be able to tell if you're genuinely interested in what they do, and what they have to say, versus what can I get out of this? Ultimately, networking is about, getting to know people with probably the end goal of getting some benefit from it, but you have to be genuinely interested. And it reminds me of the quote, which I'll probably butcher. but people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Something along those lines. Is that right? Does that sound good? Yeah, okay, you can use it. It's not mine.
That was from a Metallica song, right?
Probably. Yeah. But you know, you have to genuinely care about what they, you know, it goes back to what I was saying about my meetings with the head of research and the head of fixed income and just various people around the firm. I didn't, you know, I followed up with handwritten thank you notes to those people, but I didn't say like, let me know when there's a job available or like, when is the next job available, you know, but I would stay in touch with them. And it's just, you have to.
Can we back up and talk about that?
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing. Describe how you kept that relationship. You meet with the head of fixed income.
Yeah.
Great, he gives you 30 minutes, wonderful.
Yeah.
How do you then grow that relationship from being just a one-off to, I think I saw that kid in the hallway, I think I met him 2 or 3 years ago too.
Yeah, and we were in different buildings at the time. I was
Okay.
in different buildings, so I didn't get to see her in the hallway. I always found a way to not just reach out. I felt like if I reached out and you know, did she really need to get coffee with me again? Or did I really need to go into her office and sit down? And how was I going to take the next step? And I was obviously very interested in what she did because she had done various things at the firm as well before she took over as you know, head of fixed income and head of trading. But I would always find something at the firm that related back to what she did and kind of inquire with her about, you know, hey, I saw this, I saw your name on this, why was this done? And I did the same thing with the head of research. Hey, I read your due diligence report. How'd you find this manager? Or, you know, what's your just again, show that you're genuinely interested. And it wasn't an act. I was genuinely interested in that. But again, I think just staying in touch with people, you know, ultimately that did lead to, while it didn't lead to a job in either one of those groups, it led to a job through going through the, you know, ultimately going through the interview process with the head of research. It led to a job with, you know, a team that was related to that, product management. And I still maintain a very close relationship with that woman. And she's one of our top 3 executives at the firm right now, and overseeing a massive global project. So those little conversations, those little genuine pieces of interest, is you know, I enjoyed, but it's also continuing to serve me well.
Katie, how about you?
Yeah, I think finding little things that you maybe have talked about in, you know, while you're meeting with them. They give you 30 minutes, like, you know, like clearly, hopefully there's something that you guys, you know, bonded over or,
Yep.
you know what I mean, had in common or whatnot. So whether that's an article that made you think of them 3 months later, and then you know, email them and be like, hey, I thought about our conversation. I came across this, you know, whatever it is, but finding little things that maybe that you may have had in common and that continue, you know, to pop up. Things like that. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that he mentioned how he, you know, he asked, he went and made that call. And I think, especially if we're talking about younger, you know, people, asking is the easiest thing, but also the hardest in the sense that a lot of people will be like, I don't want to bother them. I know they're really busy. Like, I don't know. Most people like don't mind.
They'll tell you if they
And
can't.
yeah, if they can't do it, they'll say no. And
Yeah.
they'll probably say no politely. I mean, if they say no rudely or they're really mean, like you probably don't want to network with them anyways.
That's a great point. right?
So it just feel comfortable enough to go ask. And right there is probably the hardest step that people don't do, even though it's a very easy thing, but it's also very hard to get over the hurdle sometimes.
And it's probably important to appreciate just from an outsider's perspective that the person whose mentorship you seek or sponsorship you seek or job who you're fascinated by was at one point
Yeah.
trying to network and figure out
Yes.
what they wanted to do with their lives, because the commonality amongst 3 of you here is just that it's been a very crooked line and it continues to be crooked. So I think that's fascinating. You mentioned something that I'm a big believer of, and that's articles and reading something. And I think that the more senior people become, I found that obviously the more of the greater the veracity of their interests and pursuing them. As far as and the breadth of those interests is also spectacular. I mean, they're readers. They consume things. They're always interested by things. I have become a notorious book gifter. And if I read a book that I find to be interesting, I will send a copy to someone that either I met with once or twice, or even who's just trying to get a meeting with, like, hey, we have a mutual friend in common. They've mentioned how great you are. I read this book. I'm gifting it to a few people. love to get together and talk about it at some point if you're interested. And it tends to be a nice jumping off point
Mhm.
and a way to make yourself different because at some point, it's important. They only have so much time.
Yeah.
And ability to talk to people. I want to pivot a little bit, and talk about the opportunities and the job market within, the greater Twin Cities community. It has certainly changed significantly, over the past 15 years. Could each of you maybe share, and we're running up on time already, just in a few minutes, your thoughts about the evolution of this market and where the jobs you think are going to be? And if not, great to start with you on this.
Well, maybe I'll try to give the alts perspective a little bit and kind of a high-end perspective. So, I think we're seeing, at least on the asset manager side, a little bit of evolution of the firms that are in town as some of the original kind of Cargill family tree spinouts are growing up and some, offices, a lot of folks moving to New York and offices shifting. You're seeing some spinouts from there too. So smaller, newer funds, if you want to try to do something at a scrappier group, that's maybe one of the former principals from there, things you're seeing those spring up in kind of that specialty credit market that we've kind of grown famous for here in the Twin Cities. I think for a time there, the venture market, we started, and it's probably true across the country, a lot of local venture funds because they're relatively easy, but less expensive to prop up and start as kind of a small venture fund. There was a lot of growth around that for a time here, and I think we'll see how many of those survive a pretty tough market. But also a tough career to start in, but an interesting spot if you can make it through those early years. I see less hedge fund type work. We do have a handful of groups in town that if you want to get into public market hedge funds and things, I'm trying to think if I've seen. There've been a handful of new ones that have popped up recently, but I think one thing we've tried to do at Kai, and I previously mentioned the event last year at Allianz Field. I've tried to create almost a career fair-like atmosphere in a way where anyone with an alts fund can come and give a 1-minute pitch on what their firm is. So as we did last year, said, hey, I called as many as I could. I think we got 40 groups to come out and said, you're selling your fund. We're not trying to, to get out and do capital introduction. Give this as if you're at a college career fair and you have 1 minute. We literally gave them 1 minute before they got kicked off the stage to just explain what you do and who you are. And I think we're going to do that again here in April. So I'm sneaking a plug in, but that is one great way if you just want to be able to see the breadth of, and that's the goal of it, to show the breadth of what the asset management community in the alternative space looks like in our chapter's region. Hopefully we can put a spotlight on that because particularly it's sometimes hard to see those firms, for advertising rules. A lot of times they're smaller, they don't have the budget to do sponsorships, things of that nature. So it's a nice way to kind of see that market.
Fascinating. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo Leif's thoughts kind of on the alternative side. I have numerous friends who have either, co-founded, you excluded, co-founded or gone to start at newer shops that are kind of more niche in nature, private credit, private equity, real assets. And I do think a lot of the firms that were huge, a lot of the private firms that were huge from those spinouts, 10, 12 years ago, are different now. And I think there's other opportunities with smaller nichier firms. But taking a little bit of a different side, kind of as it relates to me and what I see in my industry, which is kind of large brokerage, large wealth management firms. I think there's a tremendous shift happening which creates a tremendous opportunity. There's a number of different factors at play, not the least of which are, the average age of financial advisors is 59 and a half.
That's the average age?
Average age of financial advisors, crazy. And then the average age of clients who maintain the vast majority of wealth is north of 60, north of 65. So you have this simultaneous, need for younger financial advisors. And then there's the whole idea of what that model looks like. Is it going to continue to look like what we have in place today, where financial advisors, have their book of business and collect a fee? Will it shift to more of a private banking model where advisors are salaried? I don't think that'll happen. But then, you have the largest, wealth transfer in the history of wealth, right? You could probably tell me $80 trillion, $500 billion a year right now, projected to be $1 trillion changing hands from generation to generation in the next 8 years. Every year, $1 trillion. So massive amounts of money changing hands. concurring with, concurrent to just an aging problem in the industry. And that to me creates massive opportunity. And I think firms, it's a big part of my job. How are we positioning ourselves to maintain the assets that are inherently going to change hands? Because I think if you look at, if you poll the next generation who's going to be receiving this $1 trillion a year, 80% of them are looking to change financial advisors from their parent used. So that is a risk for financial advisors. It's a risk for the next financial advisors who may take over that book. So how do we as an industry, wealth management industry, look at that, position ourselves to maintain the assets, but then, capitalize on gaining assets that could be leaving other financial advisors and other firms. So I think if anybody's interested in next gen planning, next gen wealth management, tremendous opportunity. And we think about that daily at RBC. I'm in the midst of planning. We just executed a G2 meeting with our kind of next gen financial advisors in Santa Monica. We're doing one in Nashville. We're going to do another one on the East Coast. So I think there's actually, yes, the market here has shifted, but I think it's just as vibrant as it's ever been. It's just in a little bit different fashion.
Do you see more financial advisors, or do you see a greater need for the charter, CFA charter, amongst financial advisors?
Yeah, it's a competitive industry, right? I always joke, I think when you look at like on Wayzata as an example, there's 7,000 people in Wayzata and there might be 7,000 financial advisors. I think it's like the highest, it's about 1 to 1. But yeah, I mean, something to differentiate yourself, right? So I think the CFA is vitally important. I think the CFP is vitally important.
I feel like a lot of them have been going more to the financial
Yeah,
planning.
we're huge
side.
proponents of that. I think when you look at everybody on my team, 2 of us have our charter, the rest by and large have their CFP. So they've taken the planning route, and we're big believers in planning. I think our mantra is everybody deserves a financial plan. And that's not just for, can I retire? It's all the way up when we look at estate planning for ultra high net worth. So that's important too. But yes, I think something that will differentiate you in a very competitive industry, whether you are at a smaller shop, private credit, private equity venture, or you're at a wealth management firm, clients can be very selective in who they hire to manage their money. Interesting. So.
Yeah, I mean, both of them are, I think, spot on, especially, the age of the wealth transfer and what we're going to do. I think a lot of, especially the younger generation a lot of it is trying to do it themselves too, because now we have the tools to be able to do that. Whether it's going to be a good thing or it's going to be a bad thing, I'm not sure. We have been, having a handful of clients recently, newer clients or whatnot that have been saying, well, I was trying to do it myself and I was doing really good because the market was going up. So everybody was doing really good. And then now they're not doing so good anymore. And now they're like, now we've realized that we need. So I don't know, is it gonna, some of that wealth transfer, is it gonna take us some time for them to fail a little bit or, and then realize that maybe there's more, they need an advisor, they need a planner, they need somebody instead of wanting to do it themselves. And I don't know how that's all gonna shake out, but it definitely, there's opportunity that yes, the age of advisors is there. The age of where most of the wealth is there. We're seeing the same thing. We are very small and we are very client centric. So that it's been very good for us in the sense of a lot of our clients who are in their 70s and 80s have made it a point to introduce us to their kids and have built things that are passing it down, that the kids already are big believers and come in and whatever. But will that stay? I don't know. And so it's a challenge. I think any wealth manager, any advisor is facing right now, and it's going to be a big shift over the next probably 10 to 15 years. And exactly how it plays out, but there's incredible opportunity there for it. So.
I've been going to you about cleanup for I think 2 or 3 questions now, Katie. So I'm going to put you on the spot to go first now. What advice would you give your younger self with about 7 years experience? I don't want to say not when you're 12 years old.
Yeah.
Don't go in the jungle gym, if you've had that many Capri Suns. No, like 28-year-old you, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I still probably try to remind myself this now, is like try to enjoy every season of your career and your life. I think a lot of us, and I do, spend so much time thinking about what do I want to do next? What do I have to do to make this happen and all this kind of stuff. And there's learning opportunities and there's enjoyment. You mentioned, you liked every job you had. They were all different, and they all brought you to a different place and it maybe is where you wanted to end up or wasn't where you expected to be or whatever it is. I think there's things about every season of your career that you will either miss or were great, and just enjoy them as you go, even if you are continuing to look to the future. And obviously we all have to still, plan out our lives and our careers, but just remember that it's not always greener. And the where you are right now can still like bring a lot of enjoyment and is going to benefit you in the long run.
I would say two things. I would say patience, and I'll come back to that, but I would say probably first, don't underestimate the importance of culture. I know it seems like that may be something you put aside when you're looking for that next opportunity. But if there's something that doesn't necessarily feel right, or you meet some people who are a little, not necessarily congruent with kind of your morals, your ethics, your values, don't just think that's not important, because I think, we all spend at least 40 hours a week at work. And for most of us, it's probably closer to 60, right? Like, does the job ever stop? You need to like it. And I think you may not like the work, but if you like the people with whom you're doing the work, it makes all the difference in the world. I've been lucky where, I work at a firm where it never feels like a job, right? And I think that's largely because when I see people in the office, it's more often hugs than it is handshakes and 3,000.
Even post-COVID.
Even post-COVID, yeah, right. It did stop for a while, but yeah, it's and we bring, we're in the business of always trying to meet with other advisors at other firms and talk about RBC, and we'll bring them up to Minneapolis, and they get in this recruiting room, and people will cycle through and talk, and I'm getting in there, and it's hugs, and they kind of, we talk all day about what our culture is like, but until you actually see that and feel it, and just think that's so vitally important to be happy at work. And again, we spend so much time working. Do not underestimate that. I would say patience too. I end up meeting with, for whatever reason, I must be approachable by I must be seen as approachable by younger employees at RBC. And so I'll meet with a lot of them and kind of informally mentor them. And it's really, I think one of the common traits I see is a lack of patience. And I mean, you're not entitled to the next job, right? People want to know that you are determined, that you are dedicated, that you're a hard worker, that you believe in the mission, that you know what the team's goal is, you're working towards that every day, and you have fun doing it, you make good relationships. It's all important. And if you are in the job for the next job, it shows. And just through little comments you might make, I would just say it's important to be patient. So culture and patience.
Wonderful, thank you.
I just echo having been in the culture at RBC, I did love my time there, right? And it was some great friends and great people you got to work with, and it was a really hard decision to leave there and do my own thing. And I think, if there's a piece of advice, I have two of them, but one would be, recognizing even so, right, do you see the long term? Is this really going to be the right fit for what you want to do? And if you're in an organization that, you're rewarded by getting more responsibility for more people and taking on new initiatives, there are people that love that. And I think you need a lot of those. And I think for me, it was recognizing that's not me. I just want to find something I really like to do and try to do it really well and have, people reward me for that directly. And that, I think, more than, like I said, there's no dislike of RBC. It was just, that business model for what I want to do is probably not the right fit there, but maybe I can still work with them in a different way from a different seat.
You are, yeah.
And did that. So that would be one thing, is just, knowing what you want, and if the current place, even if you do like it, is gonna, get you there. And the other way I'd say is just there are mistakes of inaction and mistakes of action. And I've always find the mistakes of inaction to be way more expensive than the mistakes of action. Don't say that to your compliance department, but but in general, right? Like I think we've, you know, Brian and I used to refer to some of our plays as the GSDs, the ones that got stuff done, and they would do things. Yeah, they'd make mistakes on occasion, but stuff would get done, and you didn't have to worry about prodding them and figuring out who was in. So I'd say, you know, you're better off getting a project done. Maybe it's not perfect, than constantly waiting to go check back in and see if, is this the direction I should go, or is this the direction I go? It's and even now, it's something that I haven't been great at. And as when there's no one else there to go check in on, you just gotta screw stuff up and keep sending stuff out and try to make it work. So yeah, in general, you know, I think Amazon calls it a bias to action. You might call it paralysis by analysis, but you're better off doing something and screwing it up than sitting back and wondering if you would have done it at all.
To get stuff done, so stuff.
Nothing worse than a baseball game ending on called strike 3.
Yes.
Right? Swing the bat. All right, we got a few more minutes left. Why don't we open it up to a question and answer section? Here we go. Where do you see advisors adopting change and resisting change?
That's probably for me. They resist everything. No, it's actually, you know, it's an interesting question. So the average age being what it is, advisors grew up in a very different environment than the environment that a new advisor would enter today. So you're not looking through the white pages and finding some names and selling a muni bond or selling a new stock, right? It's building a relationship. So there is this problem that we run into of trying to, I jokingly refer to older advisors as dinosaurs, and you're trying to like teach, the dinosaur a new trick, and it doesn't always happen. And part of my job is making sure I'm spending my time wisely. So if I'm not getting any traction with somebody and they're resistant to change, I'm not gonna, that's fine. We can be friends, but I don't have to spend time on you necessarily. But adopting change is the name of the game. I talked a little bit about the changing dynamics, what we have at play in terms of the characteristics of the industry, and those that don't adopt, I think, will adopt or die. So you need to adapt. You need to adapt. You need to change. You need to be open to new ways to do things. You need to understand that there's so much more to a relationship than just the investment piece. Clients expect that, right? So everybody's going to be doing that, and that is vitally important, obviously. But there's so much more that goes into a relationship, and if you can't change, if you can't shift from purely the investment piece to the planning, to estate reviews, to the insurance and annuities, and the liquidity and the cash management, behavioral pieces, family dynamics, eventually we won't have much of a business to pass on to the next person.
Interesting. Thank you. Leif, you got a question. It said, what was the moment like when you knew it was time to start your own business? I think that's a good question. I imagine it's terrifying. But also maybe follow up with, when was that moment? Talk about your aha moment, like it's time for me to.
The aha moment. I think I maybe wrote about it in my first newsletter, but the aha moment was I was out on a walk during COVID, listening to some podcast about the 100 True Fans. At the time was the writer who wrote it at the moment. But the idea was, in the distributed economy with internet, historically, let's say you're a musical artist, you needed to have millions of fans in order for your distributor to take their cut, record sales people to take their cut, all of the different layers you needed to get to your fan. Meant that you needed a lot of fans in order to be an artist. And today, in the world where you can reach your fans directly, if you can get 100 true fans that will pay you $1,000 a year, you can make a good living as an artist because you're not paying all those middlemen. And to me, it just said, look, maybe I can find enough true fans that want to work in small niche managers in a unique way. I didn't need to have a $1 billion organization. I didn't need to have my name in the newspaper as the new, big CIO, big CEO of some big company. It was, is there a way where I can do work that's interesting, that I want to do for the rest of my life, make enough money to pay for the kids' figure skating lessons, and then structure these things in a way where if I do it right, there's a lot of upside. And so that was the moment, right, on that walk where I said, maybe there is a way to do this, and spend the next kind of 6 months thinking about how would you structure that. And I continue to spend every day trying to figure out how to structure that, to be honest. And then what was the other part of it?
It was, when
When
did
did you
you know
realize
and when did you realize? It sounds like it was on your walk.
Yeah,
And what did it feel like? How did you get over the fear to taking action?
yeah, I think it was, like I said before, when I left my job at Slocum, when I was becoming Pavilion, younger kids, very different point in life. Well, fast forward 6 years, they're a little more self-sustaining, different financial position. And so, yeah, we could take a risk for, I say we, 'cause it's the family really taking the risk for a year or two to see if this thing is gonna work or not. And so it was a different family position. It also is part of, as I kind of alluded to in the last advice piece, which is we were really successful with what we built at RBC, and it had grown to the point where, you need different people to run a business from 100 to, 100 million to a billion, from a billion to 10 billion. I think it's a different skill set. It's a different, type of business that you need to build. And when I realized that I really wasn't interested, I think like I said, RBC, you kind of have to move up. And the minute you look at your boss and you see his job, and it's the only job, and he's the head of alts, and you want to stay in alts, and you really don't want his job, I think that's when you think, maybe I should be thinking about what I
Time
was
to do
thinking.
something else. We've done a lot of talking about managers and alts, not too much about publicly listed securities, which is, Katie, your area of expertise.
Yeah.
Where do you see opportunities there within our Twin Cities community?
So the active management arena in the Twin Cities, I mean, has shrunk over the years. The larger firms that were, we had Columbia, a lot of the even smaller to mid-size, some of them have shut their doors. So where there's not very many. But I will also say with the rise of passive securities, that's been across the country. So it's never going to go away. There's a place for active management. I clearly believe in active management, and so it's not going to go away. And clearly, if your performance is well and you can continue to perform and all that, you can make the business in it. But I don't know. I don't see it being a huge growing part of the Twin Cities industry, especially when you take passive, you take alts, you take all these other things. I don't. There's a place for it, and there's a few opportunities here, but it's not going to probably be the future of.
Not necessarily where the growth opportunities are in this market. That's important to know for people that are considering some sort of pivot.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time. Do you have time for one more question, perhaps? I'll look to Shannon.
We can do one more quick question.
Okay. Skill set development, post earning your charter. What's been the most important skill that you have developed since you became a charter holder? Katie, I made you lead off last time, so I'll give you a little bit of time to think about this one. Start with Leif.
I'm always in the middle.
Yeah, you did a great job, Peter. They're sitting right there.
It's something like this, to be honest, being comfortable getting up, with relatively little preparation and sitting in front of the audience and being ready to just answer questions honestly and on the spot and think through, the answers as you go a little bit. I think that was, never part of the early training. It's certainly not an analytical capability, but to be able to, not get nervous to get up and explain what you've learned over the years and being able to, hopefully convey a message in a way that the audience can understand. It's something I'm, still working on, but it's something I think I've done better at to, improve that communication, writing, and storytelling.
Was this through things like Toastmasters, or was it just through repetition and putting yourself out there?
A little, reputation for yourself out there. Admittedly, going to grad school in Chicago helped a lot. There's a lot of presenting there and talking with, people that are a heck of a lot smarter than you and taking hard questions from them. And then, with the Kaya organization being involved there and sitting in your seat for a lot of those and getting up and leading panels, it's, a number of avenues.
Interesting. Thank you. Peter?
I'd say two things. One, just being a sponge for information. Being in the investment world, you hear so much, whether it's, specific to companies or companies or various companies' thoughts on markets and expectations and, or it could be just random topics that you're sitting on, you know, in a client meeting and they happen to bring up something that you also saw and you actually can talk about it. So I think that's really important. You know, you mentioned reading, staying up on that. That's an incredible skill set just to be able to read the information, think about the information, maintain that information because you never know when you're going to use it. And then I would say very much so, getting in front of people, like not being uncomfortable getting in front of people. There's nothing worse than being in an audience. You can tell the person on stage does not want to be there and it's uncomfortable. And I mean, it shows, they know it, the audience knows it. So being comfortable with, I think it starts with being confident in your message, right? Nobody wants to get up and say something that they're not confident in or they don't believe in. So that all goes back to being passionate about your job, you know the information you're delivering, believe in the information you're delivering, and you will deliver it in front of a large group of people in a very, very good format. And people will know that you like doing that. So I think if you can develop a skill for having the information that you want to deliver, but delivering it in an effective way, in a confident way, I think the sky's the limit.
Someone once told me, they said, no, and then know you know.
Yeah.
And
It helps
give you the confidence you need.
Confidence is
Yeah.
everything.
To kind of piggyback off that, I would say be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because I think,
Yeah.
and whether that's in front of people or being, a speaker or presenting in a room, but also, sometimes in your job, so much of my career has been made of, somebody, needing to do something and I'll be like, I'll do it. I have no idea how to do it when I say I'm gonna do it. And then being comfortable enough to being like, all right, I gotta figure this out before I make a fool of myself. So being comfortable just raising your hand and figuring it out, and then sometimes, providing the results, whether or not they're right or not, but being comfortable being like, all right, it's better than nothing. Nobody else is willing to do it, so and just going for it. So
Wonderful. I'd like to thank this very distinguished panel. This was a great event. Thank you so much. Could the members of the Career Development Committee please stand up that made this wonderful event happen? It was magnificent. We really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I wasn't asked the question, but I was gonna say, learn to own your mistakes, because I made a mistake at the beginning by not thinking that. So thank you. So a couple quick notes. We'll see if we can get some answers to these questions we didn't cover and send them out to you. And we will send a survey too. So please respond to our survey. It really helps us know what the membership is looking for. And you have a great opportunity for networking. Even if you didn't sign up, we do have a pretty large holiday social happening over at the Fauché, starting now until 6. So please feel free to come over there and join us for networking happy hour. It goes from 4 to 6. We have quite a few people signed up. And if you are interested in getting more involved with the CFA Society, I'd be happy to talk with you and let you know about different opportunities and where some volunteer opportunities are for you. And again, I want to express my thanks. This was just wonderful. You all just shared really great information. Thank you.